But Paris was different. Most of the work I did was still top secret, but it wasn't as delicate as it was the first part that I typed. There were men that would come in and need a typist, so we were really in a pool that they could pick any of us up that wanted to. But it was a little bit different in Paris because we took lots of tours. We went to every museum that we could. We were free to go anywhere. So my year and a half in Paris was well spent. And I often say this to high school students: study your history, because you never know when you'll have a chance to have an experience the way I did. Because I figured that if I get nothing else out of my experience, it will visit the historical places in Europe. And then I'll go back. Then it was time for us to come home. We'd been there from February 44 to October of 45. And I remember I was in Perth, Scotland, when they said the war was over. That was in May 7th, 1945. But it was July before the peace treaty was signed, because it took so many times, so many plans to get. There had to be a representative from every country had to be at that table to sign the peace treaty. So it took them a good while for it. And it was in this small town in France. I was able to have a trip down there so I could see where the table was that they all signed the peace treaty on. And then we packed up. We went back to Southampton, and we boarded the Queen Elizabeth this time to come home on. And I went on back to South Dakota. By this time, my mother and dad had moved to town because my one brother had taken over the farm. And I kept in touch with Noel. And in February, he came up to meet my folks and make plans, and I got married in April of 46. And I've been down here in Georgia ever since. So I like to think of myself as a Southerner. But, you know, this 3 years of experience in the war has had a lasting impression on me. And I'm finding out more and more now that I've been speaking. I started in '94 when I told somebody that I typed up the battle plans. And I've been speaking since then. I do, on an average, around November, 4 or 5 a month. Now it's about 2 or 3. But it's a wonderful experience because I not only talk to school children, I talk to military people, I talk to the generation that I'm from, who experienced all of the things that we did during the war. And their stories are just as interesting as mine. But I think the most important part is when I speak to students like you who are studying World War II, if you could just imagine the feelings that I had as I was typing the battle plans of the invasion, and then to know ahead of time, I did send, someone told me that it was on the internet so that we could pull it up. And if anybody wants it, you can pull up the whole 3,000 pages if you want to, but I pulled up 25. And I pulled out the part that I thought would be the most interesting to you. And what it entails is the millions of tons of equipment that had to be ordered. And that's what we were doing those 6 months when those men came in and dictated. See, each country was supporting the war. And every country had to send supplies. It didn't all come from the United States. So it's the supplies that came from New Zealand and Australia and all the South American countries. And where it had to be placed in France, along the shore, and in London. Millions and millions of tons, not only food, equipment, but like you said, the planes, the equipment, the machinery. And it's one thing that amazed me was millions of gallons of oil that had to be stashed in France for the army to use. And then too, it goes into detail about how they had to, on D-Day, how they sent the transportation unit over to build a ramp so that these ships could unload as fast as they could. That to me is what was very interesting. And I hope that you will have a chance to see it. And I left the code in there, so if any of you want to pull it up, because it may be something that you could use later on. So I'm down here in Georgia now. I've had a wonderful life. We were married 30 years. In that length of time, we adopted a son. And then in 1982, John was killed in a hot fire in his apartment. Smoke got him. And then shortly later, my husband had a heart attack and died. So in 1982, I had just retired from Delta. That's where I was working. And I knew that I had to make a life for myself. And I immediately started volunteering for the American Red Cross and everything else that I could think of. And so I was given 65 years of community service award. And that's what I was doing in Phoenix 2 years ago when I met the President of the United States. So I look back now on my life, and I think I'm very, very fortunate. You know, when I speak to elderly groups that are my age, I tell them, you're all going to have to go through losing a mate or losing somebody. You can either go up or you can go down. And I was determined I was going to make something of my life, and I really have. And it's being able to come to places like this and tell my story and maybe enlighten you a little bit, but it's been worthwhile. But I want to go back one more time on D-Day. It was very interesting because we in the office knew where each one of the generals were supposed to invade. And it was very interesting because we were watching General de Gaulle, and he had to stop for tea at 4 o'clock. And the rumor would go around the office, oh boy, till 4 o'clock, might as well call off the army because he's already stopped for his tea. And then it was interesting when they were talking about who was going to liberate Paris. De Gaulle wanted to do it, and General Eisenhower said no. Well, see, my memory dropped. No, General said no, de Gaulle, the Free French were going to liberate it. That was their city, and they were going to be the ones. So it was Patton who wanted to get in there with his armored division. And so the general cut his gas off, his fuel off, said no more fuel for General Patton until we let him go. And so he didn't get to go in there first. But that was interesting to know who got to Paris first. And of course it was de Gaulle, but there was fighting, and Patton did come in. He did have to clean it up because he was in there He was in there when we got there. So, but de Gaulle didn't have the equipment to clean out the Germans. It's too big a city, and it needed a tank to go in and do it.